The first two-player game, a Gottlieb, appropriately entitled Duet, came onto the market in the early 50s. Soon, four-player games began to appear in the 50s as well. Up until 1957, most pinball machines had wooden legs, ash, the same type of wood used for making baseball bats. The rails that held the playing glass over the field were also made of wood. By the early 1960s, primarily because of the establishments where most of the pinball machines were located, the legs as well as the rails were beginning to be made of steel. And steel rails and legs have remained a constant in the industry ever since. Around 1960, Add-A-Ball games began to appear on the market. On the Add-A-Balls, instead of winning games, you would win extra balls, thus prolonging playing time. This is the Gottlieb game called Flipper, the very first machine to feature the Add-A-Ball concept. The Add-A-Ball games were generally well received by the public, and the anti-gambling establishment seemed to be pacified as well. Up until the early 1960s, the ball was introduced into the plunger chamber through the use of a manual ball elevator. In 1964, Bally introduced the electrical ball return, a solenoid-powered kicker which would propel the ball up the short incline into the plunger chamber. By the end of 1966, the old ball elevators were virtually extinct. Another interesting addition to the playing field in the 60s was this device. The popular drop target made its debut on a Williams game called Vagabond. Drop targets remained a consistent and widely enjoyed playing field feature on many games throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. In 1965, on a Gottlieb game called Bank-A-Ball, return lanes were first introduced. This extremely significant innovation was so very simple in concept that it's a wonder that it took so long to come to pinball. The return lanes used a thin steel rail to split the side-out lanes. Now the player had a 50-50 chance of keeping the ball in play longer. And better still, if the ball was saved, it would roll right down to the flipper. Exactly what the players had been waiting for. The spinner made its initial debut to pinball on the Gottlieb game Swing Along. The spinner, as seen here, will rotate in direct proportion to the force of the ball as it hits the face of the flag. Points are scored on every rotation. This has always been a favorite feature for pinball enthusiasts because there's nothing better than a powerful direct hit off of the flipper and into the spinner. This 1963 GG game brought about the first ever bonus points for the pinball player. Besides adding points to the player's scoring, another reason for introducing bonus points was to keep the player from tilting the game. Most pinball players will agree that there's a great sense of satisfaction watching earned bonus points tally up at the end of their play. In 1969, Gottlieb introduced the unique Vari-Target. This was the very first calibrated target manufactured. As we see here in this game, the harder the Vari-Target is pushed, the greater the scoring. Like the spinner, points are awarded on the power of impact, coupled with ball accuracy. From their inception and throughout the 1960s, flippers were rather slow and lacked a real punch. For a long time period, flippers all basically looked the same. But this began to change on a 1968 game called Hay Burners 2. On this game, flippers increased in size from 2.5 inches to 3 inches. This extra half inch gave the flipper more power. As DC current began to be employed in manufacturing, response time of the flipper improved dramatically. By the early 70s, by simply switching the flipper coil from AC to DC, flippers gained tremendous power. During the 1960s, the whole world was getting hooked on pinball. All of the big three, Gottlieb, Williams, and Bally, were having huge success in the export markets. In 1969 alone, over 50% of Gottlieb's sales were outside of the United States.
Looking at the world marketplace for pinball, what's significant is World War II. It was the establishment of the USOs overseas, and for GIs who wanted a flavor and a piece of what they were fighting for, it was being able to go to these places and have a jukebox, have a pool table, have a pinball machine. Well, the war ended, the equipment didn't come back, it stayed there, and it filtered really into society, into England, into France, into Germany. You have an adult audience overseas. It has always been something where, because it's Americana, there's been a unique attachment to it. And I think what has happened over the years, where Europe today dominates sales. Overseas, internationally, about 60 to 65% of our business is done overseas.
Also in 1969, Pete Townsend of The Who had composed the rock opera Tommy, about a deaf, dumb, and blind pinball player. Tommy was a pinball wizard, and the 45 of the same name was an instant AM radio hit. But more importantly, players now had a name for themselves. The motion picture Tommy came out in 1975. The cast featured Elton John, Anne Margaret, and members of The Who. The Broadway production is still selling out today. As may be expected, pinball players are never happy to see the cost per play go up. From the 1930s up until around 1960, the cost to play went from a penny to a nickel. By 1960, coin mechanisms were modified to give 1 play for a dime and 3 plays for a quarter. Into the 70s, most games began to award 2 credits per quarter. As the late 70s approached, games began to change from 5 balls to 3 balls, 1 play for a quarter, and 3 plays for 50 cents. Many operators were attributing their price increases due to the newer and more advanced solid-state machines of the late 70s. For a very short time, when the industry was under the illusion that the Susan B. Anthony dollar was to remain a monetary mainstay, machines accepted them as well. Today, it's 1 3-ball game for 50 cents and 3 3-ball games for $1. One of the most celebrated and eye-catching aspects of pinball has always been the backglass. It is what first lures the player to the machine. With its beautiful multicolored motif, it beckons the player to come closer and give the game a try. Some backglasses are amusing and interesting to look at, while others take us away on an adventure, either in the past, present, or future. Some are pure fantasy. They can remind us of fun and relaxing time spent with friends. They reflect our popular recreational pastimes, or a bit of history. They may give us a glimpse of Hollywood, or they may take us into the world of rock and roll.
Pinball art is really the epitome of what fantasy escapism is. It's comic book artwork, it's record album artwork, it's poster artwork, it's everything wrapped into one, and it has one dynamic quality that no other art medium has ever had. It's all backlit. Or as somebody once said, good artwork gets the first quarter in, and a good playing game gets the rest of the quarters.
During the mid-1970s, another major technological breakthrough had come to pinball: the advent of solid-state electronics as opposed to the long-standing electromechanically operated machines. Also, digital LED scoring was introduced as opposed to the old scoring reels. As machines moved towards solid states, the guts of the machine went from this to this. Operators and repairmen had to learn a whole new bag of tricks to be able to work on the new high-tech machines. This is Captain Fantastic. It was one of the last mass-produced electromechanical machines ever made. Any of today's serious pinball dealers or collectors, when referring to a machine, will either call it an electromechanical, a solid state, or an old wood rail. While the cost to play was increasing and machines were switching over from the old electromechanical to the newer solid-state machines of the mid-70s, another player had entered the gaming arena. As games like these came onto the scene, pinball would drop to the number 2 spot for months at a time. Pinball would fight back with more sophisticated games, using more ramps, multi-levels of play, talking machines like the Black Knight,
The Black Knight will slay you.
the new Magna Save, multi-ball games, bigger machines with larger playing fields and backglasses, and more exquisite backglass art design. All of these heralded changes and nuances to pinball were going to put it back at the number 1 spot in popularity, where it belonged. But it never happened. There were a few bright spots for pinball even during the video game explosion. Games like Pinbot, Comet, and High Speed elevated the technology of the early solid-state machines from mere gimmickry to viable and essential components for the new generation of pinball.
I am at your control. I don't make up.
Today, the tradition of pinball continues with great pinball players and arcade players would enjoy pinball games for years to come. For the scoring, from 1977 to 1985, there were numbers. From 1985 to 1991, words and numbers, like Funhouse. And from 1991 to the present day of time, we have a dot matrix screen on every pinball that is able to draw pictures. Here's an example of my favorite pinball machine, The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Watch out, Bob.
East off and sun.
And this tradition of pinball continues today. At Pinball Hall of Fame in Las Vegas, Nevada, where you see all of your favorite pinball machines, old and new. From the old pinball machines of the 1950s to the pinball machines of today. Only the pinball manufacturing company, Stern Pinball, remains its operation today, with the latest pinball machines. Of course, I will be filming Pinball Hall of Fame in Las Vegas in the next Video Game Mania Special Edition. Now, let's get on with the Florida Arcade and Pinball Exposition.
Here's Pioneer's Runner. How you doing, sir?
I'm great. I'm John Russo. I'm one of the show
Hi,
organizers.
John Russo. Nice to meet you.
Meet you. I got the same camera. It's cool.
Yeah. So, what's the most important thing about pinball?
The most important thing about pinball, I guess that's almost different to different people because it is really a work of art. But the thing that makes pinball different than any other amusement game is it requires much more dexterity and hand-eye coordination, in my opinion.
Right. So, I love pinball when I played when I was a kid.
Sure.
Don't you?
Well, of course, obviously, I brought the show, helped bring the show to life. One of the funniest things and neatest things about watching guys our age, I'm middle 40s, I get to feel you're a little younger than me, but in any event, is bringing kids in here and literally teaching them to play pinball, because they just push the button when they can find it and wait for something to happen, and they don't realize they have to impact the game and launch the ball into play. Keep it moving. And you know, there's things like English, you know, to use a term from billiards that matter.
There are many different language pinballs in the country outside of ours.
Yeah, well, when I say English, I mean the spin on the ball. You know, if we get a ball spinning one way or the other, you'll get it to kind of make a little curve, almost like a curve ball or something like that. You'll get some movement in addition to front and back, both horizontally on the ball.
Right. So, John Russo of Apollo Amusements.
Yes, sir.
I love your place, and it's fun. I'm gonna play right now.
I hope so. Enjoy yourself. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, John. There you have it. John Russo, Apollo Amusements. Let's play. Taking back in the days of the Wild Wild West. Let's play. Oh, look at that. Nice. Here's a classic pinball. This is based from the TV series Rocky and Bullwinkle and Friends, invented by Dana East. Dot matrix screen and great playfield. Rocky and Bullwinkle on the playfield. Peabody and Sherman. Boris. Spin and win. Aesop and Son. Right here. The Fearless Leader. Launcher. Rocket J Squirrel, the flying. Fractured Fairy Tales is over there. The years. Like a time, a Wayback Machine.
When we come back, some exciting hints and tips for Devil's Crush on the TurboGrafx 16, and a walkthrough of more Pinball Machine.